right. Welcome to the first episode of 2024 of the Book League Podcast. And this week's episode is The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. Again, that is The War of Art, not The Art of War. I've had a few people message me and say, you got that mixed up. It's The Art of War. And that is not the book that we are reading this week. This week is The War of Art. And I believe it's probably a play on words from The Art of War, but it is a book about creativity. I think it was originally written specifically for writers, but it's been adopted by quite a few people within the creative space and really kind of adopted by a lot of people even outside of the creative space. Sorry about that. So I know that it's a book that is pretty frequently recommended by Joe Rogan. I know he talks about it quite a bit on his podcast. That's where I originally heard of this book. And I've also heard it on the Lex Friedman podcast, as well as a couple other podcasts that, are kind of similar in that vein of interviews and just talking to lots of important people about books that they read. And this one seems to come up pretty frequently. And I decided to choose this book as the first book of the year because originally growing up, I thought that I wasn't really a creative person. So if you had asked me basically from about middle school, maybe even late elementary school through, definitely probably within the last 4 years of my life, so till I was about 26, I would have said, hands down, without a doubt, I am not a creative person. I don't have a creative bone in my body. So that was basically how I classified myself, how I saw myself. And within the last couple of years, I would say that's definitely changed. I don't think that I am an absurdly creative person, and maybe that will continue to develop over time. But I do think that I have some creative tendencies. Maybe I'll say it like that. I am decently creative. So I, took up photography for a long time, and that was probably my first venture into what I would call a creative hobby. And then really, I would say my creativity came in through entrepreneurship. So anybody who's been an entrepreneur or is thinking about starting businesses, I would say that just be prepared because it is a creative process. Whether it's, problem solving, thinking outside of the box, coming up with solutions, or coming up with an idea just in general, basically the entire journey of an entrepreneur is a creative journey. It sounds dumb now to me, and maybe it sounds dumb already to you, but the idea of an entrepreneur is that you are creating something. So obviously you're a creator. I never put two and two together. I always classified entrepreneurs more with accountants for some reason, who I would say are more business and numbers focused, which is where I would have said, in school, as well as just my thought process, that's probably where I line up more consistently, or I have in the past. Whereas, probably in the past 6-7 years, I would say I've probably done more creative pursuits than non-creative pursuits. And this podcast definitely being one of them. So this podcast to me is definitely an exercise in creativity, which is what ultimately led me towards this book. Obviously, anybody who knows me knows that I do listen to the Joe Rogan podcast, or the Joe Rogan Experience, his podcast. I listen to Lex Friedman. I listen to all those guys pretty regularly. And so obviously this book was on my radar. I had heard it multiple times. And so I thought, you know what? For somebody who struggles with creativity, this is probably a good book to start the year off with. It will, if anything, give me a little bit of direction with the podcast, maybe help motivate me, give me some sort of insight into maybe what these creative giants are doing. And that was kind of the goal of reading this book, kind of the aspiration behind it. I don't know. I don't really want to dive super deep into my review just yet because it's very mixed. I don't really know how I felt about this book. I will, right off the bat, let's just go ahead and read the summary of this book. so that anybody who hasn't heard of it or hasn't heard, another person describe this book, you'll have a little bit of a background in it. So it's a nonfiction book that highlights the forms of resistance faced by artists, entrepreneurs, athletes, and others who are trying to break through creative barriers. That's the description of the book. It's very basic, but also the book is pretty basic as well. I want to say, let me pull this up real quick so that I don't get this wrong, but I want to say this book was dang it, an hour and a half on Audible. I mean, it's 300 pages in a hardcover book. Yeah, I mean, it is 190 pages, this paperback book. So yeah, it is a really quick read. I can't even see here. Oh, 2 hours and 29 minutes on Audible. It is a quick book. And it is a ridiculously fast-paced book. Oh my gosh, this is killing me. So it is a ridiculously fast-paced book. I believe, let me grab my phone real quick. I'm going to pause this for 2 seconds because this is actually important. All right, so I'm back. And when I say fast-paced, I mean that it just moves from idea to idea to idea constantly. And the audiobook it's hard to follow because of how quickly it moves. If it was a paperback book, I think, you could have scribbled in the margins a little bit. You could have underlined things. Maybe it would be a little bit easier to read. This is definitely a book that I would not recommend the audiobook for. There's definitely some background noise going pretty much constantly in the audiobook. It's driving me absolutely insane. The audio quality is not great. Anytime that there's a chapter switch, you can hear the noise quit out, and then there's a pause, and then you can hear the noise come back in. So it's definitely recording-wise not the greatest. And then, like I said, it just moves really quickly. So, for instance, let me just read through the chapter lengths on Audible. So each one of these sections is a chapter with a completely separate thought from the one previous. So it's like he's trying to spout as many facts at you as possible. So this is part 1, resistance. So he's just defining resistance, which is what he claims is the greatest threat to any sort of creativity or creative endeavor. And these are the lengths for each chapter: 31 seconds, a minute and 38 seconds, 22 seconds, 25 seconds, 38 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 35 seconds, 11 seconds, 20 seconds, 27 seconds, 17 seconds, 29 seconds, a minute and 12 seconds, a minute and 50 seconds, a little bit longer, 9 seconds, 21 seconds, 30 seconds, 55 seconds, a minute and 8 seconds. And this is how it is the entire book. I don't want to keep going because it's got to be 100 different chapters in this book. And I don't know how it's laid out in the actual paperback version of the book. I didn't get it. I may need to order it just so that I can see it because it's absurd. It's insane. And there's audible breaks in each one of those sections. And it's I don't know. It just wasn't fun to listen to in that, from a purely aesthetic perspective, it was not a great audiobook. So if you're somebody who struggles to listen to audiobooks, if they're not, oh, whoops. Sorry. I thought for a second there that I hadn't hit record. So sorry for the break, dude. I'm all over the place. It's late. Yeah, but if you are somebody who struggles to listen to audiobooks for any reason, if they are not well recorded, then pass on the audiobook with this one. Just get the hard copy. And like I said, it's 190 pages, so you can flip through it pretty quick, even if you are a slow reader. So that was everything that I didn't like about the actual hard, the hard facts about the books, not the thoughts behind the books. This was just, the actual presentation of the audiobook, not entirely, the best production that I've ever seen. Although there are a ton of people who have got this book. I want to say reviews on Audible were like in the tens of thousands of people have listened to this on Audible. So it's not like this is a book that has only been listened to, 300 times ever. And this guy's like a small time production, and this is just a small time book. This book has been listened to a lot. Like, it's not a small book. It's been recommended by some of the biggest figures in entertainment, and I feel like it could just use a quick update. Like, somebody needs to invite this guy to their studio and just say, all right, read your book into this mic at a normal human speed. Because also he reads ridiculously fast. So not only is he just jumping from idea to idea and just trying to spit as many facts in as short amount of chapters as humanly possible. I mean, 9-second chapters. It's about as fast as you humanly can move from idea to idea. But also he's reading at like Mach 10. So he's just constantly spitting facts out at you. And it's the worst. Like, especially for somebody who's like me, trying to put together my thoughts for a recording. I was just like, I mean, it's like I said, a 2.5 hour audiobook. It probably took me 5 hours to get through this book because I was just having to, rewind, re-listen to different parts to really pick it apart, because his presentation is just awful. Just awful. So keep that in mind when you read this book. All right. So presentation aside, this book is still only like a meh book for me. I said this last week in the 12 Rules for Life episode, but I think I'm figuring out here pretty quickly that I am not a self-help book person. I honestly am not sure what kind of book person I am right now. Still pretty early in my reading journey, but I have yet to find a self-help book or, like a motivational kick your butt in gear book that I really, really, really like. The closest I've probably gotten so far has been either The Last Lecture or Outliers. But even then, I mean, neither of those even cracked my top 5 favorite books of the year. And that was just of this year. That's not even of all time. So I know that there's a lot of people out there who basically just consume these, entrepreneurial self-help books on, repeat. They're, looking to find the next best book. They're just, their favorite book out there is, 4 Hour Work Week or whatever it is. I don't even know what that book's name is, but that is not me. And so maybe if that's you, this book would probably have some more meaning for you. But even being an entrepreneur myself, I feel like those books they just don't do it for me. I don't know. Maybe they should, but maybe it's just because I don't want to say I'm a lazy entrepreneur, but maybe I'm just not a good self-reflective entrepreneur. Maybe that's my problem. Maybe I need to spend some more time learning the craft. But this book definitely kind of slid in with all the rest of them. Now, that being said, and we'll outline exactly what goes on in this book and the parts that I liked and the parts that I didn't like. The first part I hated. The middle part was actually really good. I really liked some of the stuff that it talked about in the middle, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into that. Then he follows it with like more weird ideas and I don't know, and then kind of sums it up all at the very end, kind of all right. But overall, just kind of strange. I don't know. There was a middle section that I really liked, though. So the premise of the book is about resistance. And he basically goes on, and it's very vague and very hard to understand. But he says, resistance is the force that keeps us from realizing our genius. So the premise, again, I feel like this podcast episode is going to be all over the place. And I don't want to not take responsibility because of, extreme ownership and all of those kinds of things. But I am going to pass a little bit of the responsibility off because the book is all over the place. So how am I supposed to go over things in the book if the book is also all over the place? So first off, his big idea is that each one of us has our own specific calling. So every single person in the world has something that they were meant to do, that's like innate within you. He also goes so far as to say that like it's not a choose your own destiny, that this life is not a open slate for every individual. You don't come into this planet and decide what it is your calling is. It's preordained. It is before you. You don't have a choice in the matter. There are some people that were just born to be painters, some people that were just born to be entrepreneurs, some people that were just born to be basketball players, and some people who were just born, I don't know, to be workers. I mean, that's the part that I didn't really understand and the part that I didn't really like, because not everybody can just be painters. You know what I mean? Like, not everybody can just follow their ultimate dream, because who would make the paint? Like that's the part I didn't understand with this book. Like, he basically goes on to say that everybody has this preordained destiny in life, and it's your goal and your biggest ultimate purpose in life is to learn what that is and then to chase after it 100%. And that in life, everything that keeps you from pursuing your purpose is what he classifies as resistance. It's kind of like that voice within you that, I don't know, tells you that you can't do it, even though that's what you feel like you should be doing. Right off the bat, I've got issues with this. First thing that I've got issues with is the fact that, again, if everybody had this preordained, thing that they were supposed to do, then whose preordained job was it to pick up trash? That's, I don't know, just to say that, one person was meant to be a movie star, and that's what, from birth that they were meant to do, and that one person was meant to pick up trash, and from birth that's what they were meant to do, is really, I don't know, dumb. I just, the nicest way that I could put it, it's a dumb idea. And to say that you have no ability to choose those things at all is also really dumb. I mean, I know that in the book he uses the example of Bill Gates, and how Bill Gates, his ultimate, pursuit was to be an entrepreneur, or his ultimate, not pursuit, but his ultimate divine design was to be a entrepreneur and to be, a tech mogul. And it basically goes in contrast with just about everything that we read in Outliers, that people are results of their surroundings. And the reason why Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and everything were able to rise to the top of being tech geniuses and, these uber successful individuals was because of the circumstances that and the surrounding support that they got from an early age. Now, I am more inclined to lean towards the Outliers perspective than the War of Art perspective, 100%. I don't think that it's a pre-discovered or predetermined design of what you're supposed to go into, and that there is no deviation from that design. I think that's just, it's a really dumb idea from somebody who probably wanted to be a writer from a really young age and then ended up becoming a writer through hard work. And so for him, it worked out. But for a lot of other people, it just doesn't work out. And it's not because they didn't work hard. A lot of times it's just because, I don't know, circumstances. Again, not every single person can be uber successful. All they have to do is work hard. I personally hate that argument. I hate that argument that all it takes is hard work to be successful in whatever you decide that you want to do. Now, is hard work a requirement to be successful? 100%. Like, you can't not you can't be successful without the hard work, but hard work doesn't guarantee you the success. And also, even if you and your most inward desires know exactly what it is that you want to be, and then you work hard at it, it just doesn't guarantee you success. My experience with this definitely comes from speed skating. So for anybody who's listened to the podcast, they know that, for a long time, what I really, really, really wanted in life, probably from the time that I was about 11 up until I stopped skating, which was 26 or 27. I can't remember. But yeah, between 26 and 27, I wanted to go to the Olympics. I wanted to, I wanted to be a speed skater, and I wanted to go to the Olympics, and that's what I wanted to do professionally. And I mean, professional speed skaters, even if you go to the Olympics, it's not guaranteed. Speed skating is a very small sport. However, that was kind of the trajectory that I wanted my life to go on, and I dedicated everything to it. So just like he talks about in this book about kind of abandoning all of those inner voices of that you can't do it, you have to make it your full-time job, and you have to, go all in, and you have to be a professional about it. I did all of that. I left home from the age of, I think my first time I was 13, I went by myself to Utah to skate with a development program at a very young age for basically the whole summer by myself. And then from every summer, 13 through 17, I did the same thing. So I would just go train full time. And by full time, it was 40 hours a week of just training. And then when I graduated from high school, I moved down to Utah full time to skate. And then I did that until I was 26. And I have a lot of friends who also did that until they were 26. And I have a lot of friends who have gone to the Olympics, and I have a lot of friends who have not gone to the Olympics and who did everything that this book said to do and committed 100% to it and told everybody their dreams and didn't listen to people who said that wasn't going to happen. And basically every point of this book, they lived it, but still weren't able to accomplish that goal of being a professional speed skater or even going to the Olympics or, really any of that process. And it's because, again, hard work doesn't guarantee the outcome. Now, you can't get to the outcome. You can't get to the Olympics. You can't become a professional athlete without the hard work, because there's always going to be somebody else who's going to be willing to put that hard work in. However, to say, like this book does, that ultimately if we just give up all of our resistance, as what he calls it, all of the forces that keep us from realizing our genius, our purpose, and just go all in, that we're going to accomplish this thing, it's just not how it works. And I just don't think that's a healthy message to be putting out there, because it almost entitles people to that opinion. So, you meet a lot of people who say like, oh, or don't say, but you meet people who, do all the hard work and then feel like that they should be given success, or that that this is their shot. And then when they don't get their shot or they don't get their success, then, you spiral out of control, and they're not willing to kind of accept that reality of life, that, sometimes things just don't work out. And I just think that's important to also realize. So I know that was a little bit of a rambly, but that was kind of my way of saying that I don't entirely believe in I don't believe in, and I also have not lived the book the way that this book portrays success. So moving forward, again, trying to keep track with resistance. So resistance is a very interesting concept, and it's like the first probably third of the book. He tries to define what resistance is. And even now, after reading the book, I can't tell you what resistance is. And I know I keep saying that word, and you're probably listening to the podcast and you're like, well, tell us what resistance is. Like, I don't understand. I don't get this. Well, I don't get this, and I don't understand. Because he basically just says resistance is any force that keeps us from realizing the potential. He's like, it's that small voice in your head that says that you can't do it, but it's also like your friends and your family are resistance because they hold you back from giving 100%. It's also like your current job because it keeps you from going all in. It's also, I don't know. It's also rationalization. It's also any sort of support that you get. Apparently support is resistance. I didn't really get that part either. Going to any sort of workshops or, practicing anything is resistance. There is no practice or no, step 1, step 2, step 3. The only way to combat resistance is to basically go from 0 to 100, according to this book. Like, you have to just jump all the way in and start doing it. I think that may work for like writing, and maybe that's where he's getting his experience from. And maybe that's why I don't relate super well to this, because I'm not a writer. And for me, athletics and entrepreneurship, I don't know. Maybe you can just jump all the way in and go, jump in feet first in the entrepreneurship side of things, but you definitely can't in the athletic side of things. You can't just go from 0 to, 0 to professional in a day. Like, I saw people that tried to do that while I was skating. I mean, there were always people that would come and join development teams and try to join development teams or try to join, any sort of program without any prior experience. And they would come for, a day before they realized, like, you can't just say, I'm going to go to the Olympics and then go to the Olympics. Like, that's not how it works. And so all of this stuff about like resistance being anything that keeps you from just doing the thing, I didn't relate to it. I don't know. Again, like I said, maybe that works for writing. He's a writer. And so maybe for writers, like, the best thing that you can do is just sit down and write instead of going to workshops or, learning from people. But he also contradicts himself quite a bit because, early on in the book, when he's trying to describe resistance, he talks about workshops and he talks about support being this is all forms of resistance, keeping you from actually just doing the thing that you were meant to do. And then later on, he talks about how it's important that to learn from professionals and to consider to be humble and meek and to be constantly sitting at the feet of other people who have done great things to learn from them. So again, he constantly is contradicting himself in the book, and I think he contradicts himself in the book so much because it's so unorganized. Like, if he had gone out and he had just outlined exactly what he wanted to do and what the key points were, and then followed a chronological order, he probably wouldn't have contradicted himself so many times. Instead, he basically just for 2.5 hours just spits facts at you. He's like, resistance is this, resistance is this, resistance is this. And then he's like, later on, he's like, well, this is important, that this is important, and this is important. And it doesn't ever build off of each other. He's just spitting facts the whole time. And so some of them are great. Some of the facts are honestly awesome. And we'll talk about some of the facts that are great. But a lot of the times he's just spitting facts into the wind that I just don't think hold weight. And so I don't know. Somebody should make an abridged version of this that actually makes sense. They should work with the author and make something that can actually be useful and that doesn't detract from the importance of the important messages. So that's always my biggest problem with a book like this and with other self-help books, is that I feel like, yes, there are golden nuggets in this book, but there's so much other crap covering the golden nugget that it detracts from the actual good. And it makes the good almost less valuable because it's surrounded by other trash that you just need to get rid of. And also it's hard to discern between the trash and the good stuff because you just never know which is which. And he's spouting it all out like it's all just the greatest thing since sliced bread. And it's just really not. When he's talking about resistance, I mean, funnily enough, I love this because just think it's hilarious. But he like spouts off Lance Armstrong. It's like this great example of somebody who just fights resistance constantly. And because he has cancer and he never let that get in his way, I was like, well, it's a little, I mean, hindsight's 2020, but there's a reason why Lance Armstrong was able to fight off so much of that resistance. That's for sure. So that kind of ends the section on resistance. And that is the part that I liked the least. So if you were to pick up this book and you're like, all right, how do I find the sections that are good and the sections that are bad? The sections that are bad is the whole first third of the book. The whole section about resistance, I would just skip over. Honestly, that's what I would do. The next part is a section on the difference between a professional and an amateur. Now, this section I thought was fantastic. And this is where I want to spend the majority of the time kind of talking about the points that I agree with. And I thought, like I said, I thought this section was actually really, really, really great. And so he starts off this section with a quote, and I'm going to just kind of paraphrase this quote because I don't think that I wrote it down correctly, because he, again, talks absurdly fast in this book. But he essentially says, it is one thing to study war, and this is a quote from somebody else, but it is one thing to study war, it's another thing to live the warrior's life. So that's kind of the distinction that he makes between amateurs and professionals. So there are people who study painting. There are people who study writing. There are people who study entrepreneurship and read all of these books and, think about ideas and commit half-heartedly to them. And then there are people who live the warrior's life, or who just dive all in and do the things that the books say professionally. And so those are going to be people who are painters, people who are entrepreneurs, people who are writers, who have written books. Regardless of whether they have succeeded or failed in those ventures, they are people who actually live the things that are taught. And so I thought that was kind of a cool distinction between amateurs and professionals. And one thing that he says that kind of struck me as interesting was he said that amateurs just do not love the game enough. Because if they truly loved the game, they would be all in. So an amateur is somebody who maybe has a fondness for the idea, or maybe would like or likes it or has an interest in it, but somebody who loves the idea, who loves painting, who loves creating, can't help themselves but dive fully in. And again, that is what separates amateurs from professionals. He then goes on to say basically that in order to make that transition, you have to make it your job. It can't be something that you do part-time, because if you do something part-time, you're not fully committed to it. And it's like the quote when, somebody asks a famous writer, can't remember who the writer was, if they write only when inspiration strikes, or if they write on a normal schedule, or they treat it like a job. That was the question. Yeah. Do you write only when inspiration strikes, or do you treat it like a job? And the author replies, I write only when inspiration strikes. Luckily for me, inspiration strikes every morning at 9 a.m. And I think that is a very good kind of philosophy or mentality to have if you're somebody who is struggling to transition from amateur to professional. I know I have a lot of friends who have expressed interest in being entrepreneurs. And I have talked to a lot of people who have all of these ideas and who want to do these things and are like, hey, Brandon, what do you think of, X, Y, and Z, or what do you think of this idea? And I always just tell them like, yeah, it sounds great. I'm not an idea squasher usually as an individual. I'll point out flaws if I see them. But for the most part, I like to be, pretty supportive of people's ideas, because regardless of whether the idea is good or bad, I think always the hardest part is just to commit to the idea. And so if you squash people's ideas early, then they never get the opportunity to commit and pivot and grow the idea from its original form to kind of what it could become. But I think that's always the hardest part. People are afraid to make that jump from, I'll work on the idea, or I'm thinking about the idea and I'm trying to get it ready for me to jump all in. I'm waiting for the idea to get to the point where I can jump all in. I'm waiting for this venture to get to the point where I can jump all in. And that's like the writer who waits for inspiration before he writes. Whereas the actual professional, the actual entrepreneur, or, myself in phases of life, has pretty much said, all right, this is it. I've got, 2 months worth of life saved up, and I'm going to make this happen no matter what, because I have to make this happen no matter what. And I've been in that position multiple times in my life. I've been in that position where, you've only got a couple months left, and you got to decide, am I going to work at this from 9 to 5? Am I going to sit down and be professional about my endeavors? Or am I going to be amateur about my endeavors and work on this until it can become professional by itself? And I just don't think that ever happens. I don't think ideas and pursuits ever become professional by themselves. And maybe they do occasionally, but more often than not, you, the individual, have to treat it professionally first before the venture, before your pursuit becomes professional. I don't know if that really made sense, but that was kind of my thought process behind this whole professional versus amateur section. I really, really liked it because, again, I feel like it outlined a lot of how I feel, both as a creator and as an entrepreneur. One of the other parts that I really liked is he says an amateur over-identifies with the job and therefore is unwilling to fully commit over fear of criticism. So I think that is something that I've had to overcome, and I think this podcast has been really good for that for me. I was really, really worried about starting a podcast at first. And I know that my wife is still worried about the podcast anytime she comes on. However, she's the world's most supportive woman. And she worries constantly of the mean comments and the disapproval from others. And it sometimes can be debilitating for people. And they feel like if people criticize what they create, that they're criticizing them personally. So if somebody criticizes an episode of the podcast, for instance, and it's like, what you said was dumb, or what you said wasn't coherent, or you were just rambling during this part, or, hey, Brandon, that wasn't your best episode, that then I would take that personally. And every time they say something like that, it would be, oh, Brandon, you're not coherent, or Brandon, you're not good enough. You're a rambler. You're not good enough. And that is the difference between somebody who is, paralyzed by fear and an amateur because they over-identify with their product. Somebody who over-identifies with the podcast would then take all of the criticism personally. Whereas somebody who has the desire to create something, and what I'm creating is not me, but what I'm creating is separate from me, and it's a creation that can continually evolve and continually get better, whether or not somebody praises the podcast or whether or not somebody criticizes the podcast. Whatever the response is, doesn't matter to me. I'm just going to be continually working on my craft. That's the difference between, again, a amateur and a professional. I really liked that. That made a lot of sense to me. I think that's a really important point, especially for a lot of people who are paralyzed by fear. I think that's a very common thing in kind of the writer's world. From what I understand, a lot of people write small books or, write short stories and then never submit them to publishers over fear of rejection. And so I know that that's a problem that goes around quite a bit. But again, that's what separates somebody from that's what separates the people who can create and continue to improve from the people who are create and are just paralyzed with their creations. I think a great example of this is Mr. Beast. I know I've seen a lot of his videos just because of obviously what he's been able to create, and his ventures on YouTube are unparalleled. I mean, that dude's insane with the amount of content that he creates and what he's been able to create. But I know he's got one video that's gone pretty viral where he talks about kind of the path to being a successful YouTuber. And he says, create one video and improve one thing. And then create your next video and improve one thing. Create your next video and improve one thing. And he says, after 100 videos of improving one thing every single time, he's like, then start looking at how many viewers and subscribers you have, and maybe make an assessment to your skill level. But he says for the first 100 videos, all you should be doing as the professional YouTube creator is improving your idea or improving your product, improving your creation one piece at a time over 100-piece period. And again, I think that's what separates a professional from an amateur. An amateur would put forth, 3-4 videos and be upset that they don't have 1,000 subscribers. Whereas a professional knows that the process exists and that they are going to get better as a professional, and that they are not defined by their original works, but they will continue to hone in their skill. So that was a really cool part of the book. The other thing that he kind of talks about is kind of the idea that, and his quote here is, "It is better to be in the arena being stomped by the bull than to be in the stands or the parking lot." So again, it kind of piggybacks upon the idea of you are not, tied to the criticism, or you are not paralyzed by the idea of making a mistake, but that no matter who you are, you're gonna get stomped a little bit, and you're gonna get torn down, and you're gonna have critics, and you're gonna have people who pull you down or bring you back to reality a little bit, or you're gonna have struggles and you're gonna have speed bumps. But ultimately, if you're the professional and you want to separate yourself as a creator, that you have to have that mentality that no matter what comes, it's better to be, like he said, being stomped on, being constantly smashed, being constantly criticized, and to continue to play the game than it is to not play the game at all, and to just sit there and watch people play it, and watch people live your dream, and watch people live your ideal path for your life. Nothing should be worse than that. No criticism, no pitfalls, no hardship should be worse than never playing the game. So again, this was the section of the book that I really, really did. I really, really did like. He also said here that there's no mystery to turning professional. First 2 steps are make up your mind and then just do it. Like, you can't, there really is no other way to just, getting started. Now, I know that I said earlier that the just do it part of it I don't really love, because you can't just become professional. Those are the first, and this is where I would contradict it. There's no mystery to the pathway to become a professional. You have to make up your mind and you have to just do it. But making up your mind and just doing it does not guarantee that you finish as a professional. It's just the only way to get there. Big distinction. Again, it does not guarantee that you become a professional, but it is the only pathway to becoming a professional. So that would be the distinction, the little caveat that I would make if I was, going to criticize his work. Now, the next section after he talks about professionals and amateurs is a little bit strange. He talks about muses and angels, and he talks a lot about like Greek mythology and praying to Greek gods and kind of the purpose behind that back in the day. And, when warriors used to go to battle and they used to pray to angels. And that section, it kind of went over my head. And again, I don't know. I tried. I really did. I paused it. I rewinded it. I listened to it multiple times. I honestly don't know why it went over my head, but it didn't. Ultimately, the only thing that I got out of this section was really the idea that, if anybody's worried about starting some sort of venture or starting some sort of creative process because they're worried about the outcome and they're worried about all the resistance, as he calls it, that will come up, all of the things, all the forces of nature that are going to keep you from becoming a professional. If you are that person, if you are worried about it, from what I get from this section, what he says is that don't be worried, because as many things and as many forces or natural, inner voices or anything that you'd like to call it that keep you from reaching that creative end goal, there are equal forces and equal opportunities of good that are pushing you towards becoming your, quote, divine potential being that you were meant to be from the beginning. So I think that's what he's talking about with muses and angels, that ultimately, just like that inner voice is trying to keep you from, and all of the different hardships are trying to keep you from attaining that creative end goal, that there are forces of nature that try to push you towards meeting up with your divine potential. So it's an equal and opposite balance. This section was really confusing. I like the idea behind the kind of that equal and opposite forces, and that you just really need to tune in to that positive force. And maybe that's the idea behind it, is, tune out the negative force and use it for constructive criticism, but also tune into the positive forces that are going to help you along the way towards realizing your goals. But that's not what he said. And he tried to maybe make that point, but it was really, really confusing personally. Quick side note, there's also music that plays during each one of these transitions between themes. So like at the very beginning, there's a bunch of like really awful background music that plays for like a minute. And then when he switches from resistance to professional and amateurs, there's also like this minute long weird music that plays. And then when he switches from professional and amateurs to this muse angels theme, there's weird music that plays. And then again, there's weird music that plays when he switches from muses and angels to talking about fear. And again, it just detracts from the book. Somebody please talk to the author of this book and get him to re-record it with some actual production and some actual production help, because this guy went into GarageBand and used his iPhone and made a really awful version of this book and then added music into it. And it just is terrible, especially for thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of people who have downloaded this book. Like, please just re-record it. It's not good. Sorry, that was a side note, but I just have a note here because at this point in the book, I was listening to it and I just said, this music is so annoying, because it really is. It detracts from the book. So much of what he does detracts from the good messaging. There is good messaging in this book, but there's also just a lot of junk in there that detracts from it. So this last section that he talks about is about fear. And he brings up some good points about fear. And then he also brings up some very weird points about fear. So first of all, he said that the greatest fear that there is not the fear of failure, but it's the fear of succeeding. Because if you succeed, then you will be rejected from all your tribal inclusions and have to start creating new relationships. I just don't get that one. I think that's hogswash. Like, I think it's dumb. Like, fear of failure has definitely been a much bigger drive for me as an individual. Like, fear of failure at some points in my life meant like not eating, you know what I mean? Like, not having food to pay rent. Like, that was the failure. I was all in on the entrepreneurship journey. And there were moments when it was like, I don't have money to pay rent and I will be out on the street without food. Like, me and my wife, you know, and our kid out on the street without food. Like, that fear to me was a much greater fear than like, oh man, I'm scared I'm gonna hit it big and then people are gonna be jealous of me. Like, that, he must just have terrible friends, right? Like, that's gotta be it. Like, he has to just have terrible friends. And this is his point of view. If he doesn't have any friends who will be excited for him, then maybe that's true. And there are a lot of people like that. Don't get me wrong. I know there are so many people that would distance themselves out of jealousy from someone who is successful. But I also have some amazing friends who have, you know, stood by me through good, through bad. You know what I mean? Who have been excited for me when I have succeeded and, you know, are excited for me in every venture that I've tried. And I have one friend specifically that I'm thinking of. And we've had this conversation multiple times on the phone. Like, I'll call him up and he's also another entrepreneur. And, you know, we talk all the time about like our friends who have knocked it out of the park and are living the good life now, who have, you know, hit the lottery or, you know, as far as work goes and as far as their, you know, pursuits go. And every time I'm talking with him, he's just like, man, I'm so happy for him. Like, him or her, whoever it is, like, they're killing it. Like, good for them. You know what I mean? And so to me, this whole, like, the greatest fear is the fear to succeed is just trash. Like, surround yourself with better people, first of all. Surround yourself with people who are going to be happy for you, whether you fail or succeed. And I know that was one of the 12 rules for life from Jordan Peterson is like, you are the, you know, sum of the people that you surround yourself with. And it's totally true. Like, this person obviously surrounded themselves with trash people because that's just not true. Like, people are excited for you when you succeed. You know, you don't lose all of your family and friends if you succeed. And that was the next point he made. He literally went on to say, you know, if you succeed, you're going to lose all your family and friends and you're going to have to make new family and friends. But he says, your new friends are going to be truer and better friends because they will align with your divine or your innate sense of creation. And I was like, man, again, that's such a terrible way to look at it. Such a jaded personality. And I just didn't agree with that whatsoever. Yeah, that was, so yeah, all of this stuff on fear, I don't know, it's very interesting. He then goes on to talk about kind of the fear of failure and how basically what separates people who are truly successful and people who maybe have the appearance of success are, like, he calls them hacks. And a hack doesn't do what is in his heart, or what they were meant to do. A hack asks what the audience wants to hear and then creates that. And he is scared of being authentic. So again, just kind of more things on fear, and how a hack can be successful and win it big, but ultimately you're still a loser because you sold out and you didn't work and you don't work for yourself. You work for your audience, which I agree with. You do need to be authentic. I know that I've struggled with that a little bit on the podcast or already. Not that I'm trying to change who I am. I've made a very conscious effort to just be who I am on the podcast. But as far as book choices go, you know, I hear all the time from people like, oh, you need to read the popular books on Book Talk or, Bookstagram. You have all these, all these teenage romance books that are, all over TikTok or all over Bookstagram or all over all these things. And to get the clicks and to get, recognition and things like that, you've got to read those books. And basically I've said from the beginning, I'm only reading books that are interesting to me or interesting to the people that I'm also interested in, like this book I'm interested in, Joe Rogan and some of the books that he reads and, some of the books that his guests read. And so because of that, this is a book that I wanted to read, but I have no desire to read A Court of Thorns and Roses, and I definitely won't read that book. And it's because, again, I agree with this principle. Like, even if I was to get all of the clicks and all the views and everything from reading A Court of Thorns and Roses, I ultimately this would turn into a job where I would be working for the clicks and the views. Whereas really what I'd like this to end up being is that true creative goal of just creating what I want to create and creating value, and then other people recognizing that value and it, working kind of symbiotic between the viewer and the creator. I don't want it to be a one-way street. So this was something that I like and that I think a lot of people can read and gain something from, because I think there are probably a lot of creators out there who maybe started off with that goal of creating something that they want to create, but ultimately fell trapped to the clicks and the clickbait and everything else that they needed. And ultimately they just created for themselves another job, not an avenue for creation. So that was really it. And then the book ends pretty abruptly right after that. He does have a lot of like weird quotes and things that he says that I think are, again, just absolutely weird. And I do want to read some of the quotes. I want to read two groups of quotes here. I want to read quotes that I liked from the book, and then I'm going to read some quotes that I had some real big issues with from the book. So first, quotes that I liked from the book. Most of us have two lives. We live the life we live and the unlife lived within us. Between the two stands resistance. Solid quote. Good definition of resistance. All right. Are you paralyzed with fear? That's a good sign. Fear is good. Like self-doubt, fear is an indicator. Fear tells us what we have to do. Remember one rule of thumb. The more scared we are of a work or calling, the more sure we can be that we have to do it. Don't necessarily agree with that one, but it's a good thought. The artist committing himself to the calling has volunteered for hell, whether he knows it or not. He will be dining for the duration on a diet of isolation, rejection, self-doubt, despair, ridicule, contempt, and humiliation. I think that is true. However, it's not the only thing that you'll be dining on, to keep the analogy. It says you'll be dining for the duration on a diet of isolation, rejection, self-doubt, despair, ridicule, contempt, and humiliation. I think all of those things are going to be there if you are committing yourself to the calling or to your calling. However, it's not the only things that you'll be dining on. So you just have to be ready for that. Like you have to know that it's going to be hard and that you are going to be rejected and that you are going to have self-doubt. There is nobody who is successful who doesn't have those things, but it's the people who can overcome those that also get to dine on, the success, the fulfillment, the love, the admiration, the, self-harmony that comes from creating what you want to create. I think that's a very beautiful thing. All right. So these were some of the quotes that I did not like. So that was kind of the idea of the book. That was, some of the quotes that I liked. Here are some of the quotes that I found slightly ridiculous. And again, there's just so much crap in this book that it just detracts from the good in this book. So here's some of the crap that I'm talking about. Are you a born writer? Were you put on this earth to be a painter, a scientist, an apostle of peace? In the end, the question can only be answered by action. Do it or don't do it. It may help to think of it this way. If you were meant to cure cancer or write a symphony or crack cold fusion and you don't do it, you not only hurt yourself, even destroy yourself, you hurt your children, you hurt me, you hurt the planet. You shame the angels who watch over you, and you spite the Almighty who created you, and only you with your unique gifts for the sole purpose of nudging the human race 1 millimeter farther along its path back to God. Creative work is not a selfish act or a bid for attention on the part of the actor. It's a gift to the world and every being in it. Don't cheat us of your contribution. Give us what you've got. I hate that. I absolutely hate that. I hate the idea that you have this one thing that you're supposed to be doing, and if you don't do that one thing, that you're cheating the world of curing cancer. Like, that's just so dumb. Like, there's so many things that you can do with your life. Now, the idea of working hard and being a professional about things and finding something that you truly love and self-fulfillment, I agree 100% wholeheartedly with those things. But the idea that if somebody doesn't do something extraordinarily grand that changes the world, that you've wasted or even hurt those around you, it's just dumb. Like, there are plenty of things that people do on a day-to-day basis that are noteworthy, that don't move the needle of the world forward in any significant tick. I mean, there are a lot of people who do things in the background that are just as vital and just as important as the people who cure cancer, and that, do all of those other things. Like, you can't cure cancer without the people who make pipettes. Like, I hate that. I hate everything about that. It's just this idea that we deserve something special to happen to us, and that we are so special that, if we don't do what we want, like what we feel in our heart that we're supposed to do, that we're complete failures. Because then what happens if you have this desire in your heart to cure cancer and then you don't do it? What, you have this guilt now for the rest of your life that, you killed your child? That's like basically what he's saying. It's dumb. It's dumb. Now, a couple of these other ones, I'm taking these slightly out of context, but I mean, not really. This is what he said word for word, and it's not very out of context, so I don't understand some of these points. But he says attention deficit disorder, seasonal affective disorder, social anxiety disorder, these aren't diseases, they're marketing ploys. Doctors didn't discover them, copywriters did. He's talking about resistance at this time, and how all of these things are basically just resistance, keeping you from fulfilling your divine purpose. Again, doctors didn't discover them, copywriters did. It's just, again, just crap that is, in the midst of some all good things, but it just takes away from the good. If tomorrow morning, by some stroke of magic, every dazed and benign soul woke up with the power to take the first step towards pursuing his or her dreams, domestic abuse would become extinct, as would addiction, obesity, migraine headaches, road rage, and dandruff. I know this is probably, I think it's called a hyperbole, an exaggeration, and he's trying to make a point. However, to claim that domestic abuse and addiction and obesity, migraine headaches, road rage, and dandruff would be done if everybody just followed their dreams, there's not enough dreams out there. Like, people can't follow their dreams without other people paving the way. So to think that if everybody decided that they just were going to live their ideal life, that the world would be, sunshines and rainbows, like who would pave the roads for the people who want to drive the cars? I just don't know. Like, it's just a dumb point. Again, it just detracts. And then lastly, when he's talking about resistance, he says, Hitler wanted to be an artist. Ever see one of his paintings? Neither have I. Resistance beat him. Call it an overstatement, but I'll say it anyways. It was easier for Hitler to start World War II than it was for him to face a blank square of canvas. I mean, that's awful. I don't know. Again, somebody needs to edit this book with this guy, because there are good things in this book. There are good things. And the best things, in my opinion, are the sections about the difference between an amateur and a professional. And making that jump from being an amateur to being a professional, I think, is one of the most rewarding jumps that I've ever made, but it's also one of the hardest jumps that I've ever made personally in my personal journey. And so, reading a book like this can maybe help you make that jump. Then all power to you. I think this is, I think it's worth the read, but all of the other stuff that he says during this book basically just, in my opinion, invalidate or detract from the good in this book. So I'm a little confused as to why everybody recommends this book. Like, I don't know. There aren't a lot of books for creative people. Maybe there are. I just hate self-help books. I'll go ahead and say this right now. I have like two or three more self-help books on my list. No, I think only two. I think I only have two more self-help books on my list of books for 2024. And thank goodness, because unless I find one that I really, really like, this might be the last year that I read self-help books. So, because a lot of it I just think is dumb. And maybe I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, somebody please leave me a comment and let me know why I'm wrong, because from my perspective, this just wasn't the world's best book. I don't know why everybody recommends it. It was all right, but it was really a really meh book. So I'll go ahead and give it a rating. And I would say on a scale of 1 to 5 for fun, it was oh my gosh, a 1. I think I'm going to give it a 1. I think I'm going to give it a 1 because I hated the production. I would have given it a 2. I think if there wasn't crappy music that played every, 30 minutes, if the chapters weren't broken up in 20-second increments, and if there wasn't a constant, buzzing in the background of this book, like in the back of this whole book, like that made it almost unbearable to read or to listen to. And then on top of that, all of the garbage that's in this book really detracts from the good in this book. So as far as fun to read, this is going to be the Bookleys podcast's first 1-star book. As far as importance, I will give this a 3 on importance. I think some of the topics in this book are 5s, and some of the topics are completely misrepresented 1s. However, we're just going to average that out. We're going to give it a 3 overall in importance. There are portions of this book that I think are very important. If you read the middle the middle section of this book, I would give it a 5. I think there is gold in this book to be found. But again, the book is so poorly executed and hard to follow and just overwhelmingly fact-based instead of, or I guess it's not even fact-based. It's overall just statement-based, like just quick statement, instead of descriptions and, helping you understand things and giving examples and telling stories. I don't know. There are a few stories throughout the book. For example, the Lance Armstrong story that I found really funny. He also uses Bill Gates as an example, which I thought was funny, given Outliers, using him as well. He also uses Tiger Woods as an example and a couple others. Although the Tiger Woods example is definitely contradictory, because ultimately he says Tiger Woods is a professional because he still takes golf lessons from other people, even though he's the world's greatest golfer, which is funny because at an earlier point in the book, he also says that if you take lessons from people, that's what makes you an amateur, not a professional. So Again, full of contradictions. I don't know. It's a 1 overall. I mean, it's a 1 on fun and it's a 3 in importance. I probably wouldn't recommend this book to anybody, maybe unless you're a writer or you're struggling to gain confidence to maybe start a podcast or to, become a full-time writer or whatever it is. Like maybe if you're on that verge, on that tipping point, like if you're I think there is a book called The Tipping Point though. So maybe that'd be a better book because honestly, this book wasn't great. But if you are on that tipping point between amateur and professional and you need help to discern between, what's a healthy amount of resistance and what's holding you back and what is, what you should ignore and just run full steam ahead to pursue your creative endeavors, I'll recommend you this book. But that's a very small portion of people on this planet. For the vast majority of people, I'd say this is a skip. Skip this book, regardless of what Joe Rogan says, regardless of what any of these other podcasters say, Lex Friedman, any of these people. I think this book was just not good. I don't like it. Which is, I think, the first book that I've read that I really just don't like. So, oh well, it'll happen. All right, so that finishes up the War of Art. Next week, we will be reading One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which I am actually really excited for. And let's see, the entire year for 2024, the entire book list for 2024 has been posted on the YouTube page. If you go to the community tab, there is a post there with the entire year's reading list. If you go to our Instagram page, it should be pinned at the very top, 2024 reading list. And it is also on the website, booklypodcast.com. So if you go to booklypodcast.com and you click on calendar, the entire year will be posted there with books that are coming up. So you can read along with the Bookly Podcast. You can choose 1 or 2 books that you are interested in reading over the next couple months and read along with us, or you can just listen to the podcast and see if there are any books that I would recommend, because this is a skip for sure. So thank you so far for all of you who have been supporting the podcast, and thank you for those of you who are still listening to the podcast. And please leave us a 5-star review if you are listening on Apple or Spotify or anywhere else that podcasts are listened to. And if you are listening on YouTube, please like the video and leave us a comment and subscribe to the channel. The comments, I want to know what people who have read this book think, because the overwhelming people on Goodreads and on Amazon leave it 5-star reviews. It has like an overall 4-star review. So let me know what you think, and we'll see you next week.